was a very tense and absorbing time.
3/4 of the world.
3/4 of the world would be destroyed. That there would be that the height of materialism would come about, and then and there would be a change, but then it would happen again. The end of a cycle of cycles. And anyway, that can be read. I can't remember.
So in the content of final declaration, is it the declaration that he's just saying that I'm the avatar of the age? Or?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Can you describe if you could remember?
That's in the film too.
Yes.
It's in the film. It's read out by Maya One in the film. But to be honest, to be frank with myself, at that time, I just simply took it, oh, okay, if that's the situation, I took it at face value. And it wasn't that I was, and it wasn't that I was shattered.
So what are the words? Do you remember what was it read as a declaration? Small content?
No, I'd have to read it, Maya Prasad.
No
I mean, the thing is that it's quite a long one. It's probably good. What do you think, Diana? 10 to 15 minutes. Yes, it would be at least.
So the summary is. Can you tell me in your words what is the summary of?
The summary of it was that this was the final declaration of what would happen, that Baba would be dropping the body soon and would die a violent death, and that 3/4 of the world would be destroyed. That pronouncement, and everything was a shock to them, and as a result, there were cries of what, if this is going to happen, and then Baba clarified, and then there was a final decision. But he did clarify in the sense that certain of his statements he made in our language, certain statements he made in his language, and certain statements were made in ours and his. So, in other words, it wasn't for us to really understand completely what he meant, because
no time limits.
Yeah.
Here's that's that was in his language, and these are what each one says that.
And after the final declaration, then came the departure, and again, in this case, we all filed past Baba, and he gave each an orange. And I must confess, I have to be honest, that I followed Francis, and Baba gave Francis a thump on the back, and he didn't give me one, and I felt very jealous. Yes, and
I got one later.
But I got one later. Yeah. Anyway, and that was the end of the 3 incredible weeks. And after that, we then departed on the train, and we travelled down to Bombay and so forth.
Talk a little bit about that movie.
Oh yes, I will.
In the final declaration, is it the time Baba said he's avatar of the age?
Yes.
Oh yes.
Could you please say it for me?
I mean, of course, Baba had said that he was the avatar of the age earlier. He said that for the first time in Hamirpur, or was it Andhra? One of those places. He had declared that, and again he declared it this time. There was no question of his status. Yeah. And all I can say from my point of view was that anything that happened, it wasn't that it didn't establish my belief in Baba. I had it, and nothing happened that diminished that belief. I fully accepted, and if you'd asked me, and I would have said, well, that's what Baba said, so that was going to happen. And of course, he did die a violent death. The spasms that his body suffered, but terrible.
What was the movie thing?
I'm just thinking, I've come to sow the seed of love in your hearts.
Ah, yes, that's right. That's a beautiful statement. A part of, let me read just a part of that declaration. I have come to sow the seed of love in your hearts, so that, in spite of all superficial diversity which your life in illusion must experience and endure, the feeling of oneness through love is brought about amongst all the nations, creeds, sects, and castes of the world.
The next one too.
In order to bring this about, I am preparing to break my silence. When I break my silence, it will not be to fill your ears with spiritual lectures. I shall speak only one word, and this word will penetrate the hearts of all men and make even the sinner feel that he is meant to be a saint, while the saint will know that God is in the sinner as much as he is in himself. Beautiful statement. And so forth. When I speak that word, I shall lay the foundation for that which is to take place during the next 700 years. Wonderful. There was such a ringing quality. You couldn't help but listen and caught up with it. And yet at the same time, I didn't take it personally the way some of them took it. And that it was the loss of the physical presence of Meher Baba. I took it that if you'd asked me, perhaps I would have said, well, if that's the case, we must go on loving him. That.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Bill.
good.
We did 1.5 hours of...
Is that so?
Yeah.
God. I was thinking about my first impressions of Baba and how he came across to me as in the form of a man. Yes, he was God, but what I'm aware of is Meher Baba as a man. And there is an expression, I think in the West anyway, where you speak of a man's man. In other words, somebody that typifies in every respect how a man should be. And of course, in Meher Baba's case, what was so beautiful was his manliness, the strength of character, the strength of purpose, the strength overall that you felt. And yet at the same time, there was such a naturalness and a capacity, quite obviously, talking in my own case, of accepting all, and no matter what we were like, whether we were the greatest sinners or the greatest saints, Baba accepted all with such complete acceptance and love. in other words, a part of being a real man is, of course, also a gentleness. It's not just being strong in the sense of well, at the extreme, of course, is ruthlessness. But there's nothing like that. I'm not talking of such a thing. Yes, and then in thinking about that, it reminded me of how Barber was in the 1930s and how perfectly he was, you could say, a woman's man, if you like to put it in colloquial terms, when he was gathering to him those wonderful women, Western women disciples that what work they did for him, how wonderfully they followed him. Norina Machiavelli, Elizabeth Patterson, Kitty Davies, Margaret Krask, wonderful women. And the contrast, how interesting it was, how God is right in accordance with the need of that moment, of that time, of the 30s, and how right he was for the 50s, when so many men came to him, not only the Western men, but the Eastern. So many, and such wonderful, wonderful beings. Of course, there were men earlier, but not in the numbers, nowhere near the numbers that occurred in the 50s. Okay, another couple of things little things that I do remember that are, I think, should be mentioned. How Barber looked after us, not only ensured that Sarosh and Vilu, our hosts, provided absolutely excellent meals, far better than, with all due respect to my dear wife, than I was having at that time. I mean, particularly breakfast. It was a lavish breakfast which I'm not accustomed to. And also medically. On the one hand, at one stage, it directed that we should each have a quinine tablet to avoid malaria. And he also directed Dr. Donkin.
Didn't he give you it himself, the tablet? Or not? Did he give each lover the tablet himself?
I'm sorry, I can't remember that.
Honey, you told me.
Yes, and maybe he did. Maybe he gave it to each one of us. I wonder if that's recorded. I'm sorry, I have no. That's my impression, but I don't remember. To be honest, I can't remember. But perhaps it's recorded.
So Dr. Donkin.
But Dr. Donkin was given the task of ensuring that none of us got ill and that we would all be fit and well for the final declaration, that great meeting that he was holding the last 2 days. And what is amusing was that he in telling Donkin, Dr. Donkin, known as Don, to ensure our health, but he said if any of us fell ill, he would perhaps, I think this was it, he would hang Donkin upside down in a well for 7 days. And there was the sort of threat that Barber would delightfully mention, and I tell you, that was again, I was so impressed not only with his men Meher Baba's close disciples who supported him during the darshan program, making sure that people followed through, moved on, so that as many as possible had contact with Baba. But also such ones as Dr. Donkin. My vivid memory of him was seeing him stalking around our quarters, where we were sleeping, where we were eating, the bathrooms. He would be stalking around.
How was he dressed?
Yes, I'm going to say it. Baba, Donkin was the perfect English gentleman, as being absolutely devoted to Baba. And I can recall so delightfully seeing him with pith helmet, starched, beautifully ironed, starched jacket, safari jacket and shorts, socks, boots, and he would have a fly spray in his hands. And he would, and you could see him stalking around, as was expressed, looking for worms, germs, and microbes. Yeah, with the pump, you know, that the old type of. Yeah, and there's be a spray, but it was so delightful. He absolutely ignored us. There was no question of his concentration on this task, and that was so typical of Baba's men. They never thought of themselves. They were only intent on carrying out his wishes, his orders. Yeah. So there were certain things that did come to mind, and okay.